Duh.
In 2016, Zack Snyder thought, hey, you know what's a great follow-up to Man of Steel? What if we take Batman, who has not been previously established or introduced in this universe yet, and make him fight Superman? Well, we're going to see how that goes today. Hello everyone, I'm K Swope, and in today's video we're going to be reviewing Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. Now, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be going through the movie, we're going to be talking about the good things and the bad things, and then we're going to give a ranking at the end, okay? We're going to rank it on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being similar to the sensation of stepping on a Lego brick, and 10 being Citizen Kane, so that's kind of how this is going to look. So let's go ahead, waste no more time, and dive right in. The first thing I gotta say, first thing you see in this movie when it starts, okay? We have the Batman origin that's being told, which, I mean, they gotta play catch up because Batman has not been introduced here yet. I think that opening scene is very, very well done. And not to mention, I gotta say this too, Jeffrey Dean Morgan playing Thomas Wayne is kind of genius because I never really thought about this, but I can totally see Ben Affleck being Jeffrey Dean Morgan's son. I don't know if you ever sit and think about that. You just look at the two people and you're like, you know, I can see that. Because I can see that. And so I thought that was great. So I really appreciated seeing that. And then, of course, after we're introduced to Batman, given the origin story during the opening credits, we are thrust into Man of Steel, but from a different point of view. We are seeing the events that took place at the end of Man of Steel, okay, the big fight. We're seeing that from Batman's perspective, Bruce Wayne, and we're seeing it from the level of the people on the streets, which is insane. And not to mention, too, if you actually break down the continuity between that big fight at the end of Man of Steel and this movie right here at the beginning, the continuity is impeccable. Like, they really, really studied it, and they saw what was going on. They paid very close attention, and it is very, very well done. So I got to give credit where credit is due there. But also, it's crazy because it's setting the scene for what we're going to see in this film. Why are Batman and Superman against each other? Well, it has to do very much with what happened specifically here at the very end of Man of Steel. People are really mixed on Superman because, yeah, he saved a lot of people, but he's also super powerful, and we saw what an evil version of Superman can do with Zod. So how do we know that we can trust Superman? All those kind of questions. And I think those are very, very good questions to ask. There's a lot of great moral dilemmas and things to think about in this film. And I also think it's really interesting, too, because the film poses a very unique question, being that if God is all-powerful, can he be all good? We have different characters, and they each kind of fall on different sides of things here. And I think it's really interesting, too. Zack Snyder, specifically in this movie, I think, more than like Man of Steel, and later on in his version of Justice League, which we'll get to eventually, just not in this video. But he likes to use a lot of imagery, a lot of biblical imagery, kind of things like there, ponder some questions, that kind of thing. And we see different characters fall on different sides of this question. If God is all powerful, can he be all good? Lex Luthor, he is a hands down no. He is not good. God is bad. God hates everything, hates everyone, hates me. So we have to take power into our own hands and kind of take it like that. Batman, on the other hand, is very interesting because he kind of starts off like that. And then he realizes, because, I mean, in case this isn't obvious, Superman is basically an allegory for Jesus in this. And so he sees that, he sees those questions, and then he finally kind of realizes that Superman, obviously he's alien, he's Kryptonian, but ultimately, in terms of how he acts, his morals, he's human, okay? He has a mother, he has a life, he has people he cares about. And that is what ultimately changes Batman's perspective on things, because similar to Jesus, Jesus was all God and all man, so he could sympathize and empathize with us. And right now he sits on the right hand of God as our mediator, okay? So that's fantastic. Got to throw in my Christian plugs there. So some really, really great stuff. But I think that's a pretty decent metaphor with how you can look at Superman in this film and how people look at him. And I guess once Batman kind of really came to the realization that he is both more than human and human at the same time, it really changed his perspective on things, which we'll get to that a little later. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the moral dilemmas in this film are very, very interesting, and there is a lot to chew on, so that is very, very good, and I like talking about that quite a lot. Now I want to take a step back here, too, on a more superficial level. Batfleck, okay? Ben Affleck's Batman. I love Ben Affleck's Batman. He's not my favorite, okay? Michael Keaton's still my favorite. He probably always will be. Love the guy. But Ben Affleck is definitely probably my second favorite Batman. I really think we get a really interesting unique look and perspective on the character, one that we have not quite seen in live action before. He, of course, takes a lot of inspiration from The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller. And later on, the actual physical fight between Batman and Superman takes a lot of inspiration from that as well, but we'll touch on that later. But I think Ben Affleck brings a really good portrayal to the character. I know some people don't like Ben Affleck and don't like his version of the character. I fundamentally disagree. I think Ben Affleck's Batman is really good. I think he brings a lot of good charm. I think people often forget how much he really did in the role, because we do get to see a lot of Bruce Wayne, specifically in this film, and a lot of Batman at the same time. And I think both of them are really, really good. And there's some gripes in here as well. I know people don't like how Batman uses guns, and if he doesn't, execute people, he doesn't have much of a problem executing people. In fact, he does actually with the Batmobile multiple times, now that I'm thinking about it. We can nitpick that. I understand the concern. I wouldn't be a big fan of that really either, but I also think it's very fascinating because in this film, we kind of see, specifically by the end, we see a lot of heart change from Batman after his whole experience with everything. And so when we go to see him in Justice League, I feel like he's softened up a lot in that regard, and so he's not as dark and brooding and just willing and able to just beat the ever-living crap out of anyone he sees to the point where they are unalived, if you catch my drift. So, yeah, I mean, either way, I think it's interesting, but I think that kind of needs to be there because we do get to see a little bit of that character development later on in the series, not in this movie specifically. So if you got gripes in this movie about it, I understand that. Personally, though, I really don't care. One thing I do got to say, though, another good thing. Alfred in this movie is actually fantastic. He's hilarious. Jeremy Irons as Alfred, easily my favorite Alfred, I think, because he's super snarky and sassy, but also still very Alfred at the same time. And so seeing that contrast too, I think is really nice to see that, more dark, brooding Batman, Bruce Wayne. Jeremy Irons, Alfred, perfect. I love it. It is great. I also got to say something too. Now, when I rewatched this to do this review, I for the first time sat down and watched the Ultimate Edition of Batman vs. Superman. And some scenes definitely felt like, okay, yeah, this definitely adds, and in a good way. Other scenes, not quite as much. I'm just kind of like, okay, that's there, but doesn't really do anything for me. But one thing I noticed that I don't recall in the original movie is the aspect ratio changes in certain scenes, and I think that's very unique, and that sort of foreshadows what we end up seeing with Zack Snyder's version of Justice League, because he does the whole thing in 4:3, 3:4, whatever it is, and we kind of see some flip-flopping there between your traditional widescreen and that in certain shots, not the whole thing. Like most of the Batman-Superman fight was in that 4:3, and then when the fight was over, it switched back. So it's really interesting because it's almost like he's highlighting certain scenes in the movie by changing the aspect ratio. So that's pretty unique, and that's a cool filmmaking technique. Speaking of filmmaking, though, one of the things I admire about Zack Snyder's work so much is the cinematography. In case you didn't know this, Zack Snyder spends most of his time directing from behind the camera, meaning he is lining up the shots himself, and you can really see that, and he puts a lot of care into that. You can pause this movie at any point, literally, and you can say, okay, that looks like a comic panel, okay? Because he's just putting that much emphasis and care into what he's doing. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. Cinematography, beautiful. And that's not just in this movie. It's in all of Zack Snyder's films. So I could have said that for Man of Steel, too. Kind of slipped my mind. I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to that specifically when I was watching Man of Steel. But cinematography and all of Zack Snyder's work are always top-notch. So got to give credit where credit is due there. Also, I got to point out the actual physical fight we see between Batman and Superman, very reminiscent of the fight that we see in, as I mentioned before, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. It's fantastic. It is really good. It is one of the best fight scenes in terms of just epicness that I've seen in a superhero film. So give credit where credit is due. Just a quick mention. Awesome fight scene. But another great thing about this film, I love the score, and specifically, I really love Wonder Woman's theme in this film, okay? The little... Yeah, that's awesome. I love it so much. It sounds fantastic. So another thing in this movie, we're getting toward the end of the good stuff here, and then I'm going to talk about some bad things because there are some of them. Don't worry. Don't worry, haters. I have plenty of bad things to say about this movie. We'll get to there. But in the meantime, Superman dies at the end of this movie, and I think that is a really interesting thing, and let me kind of talk about that a little bit. I think as a twist, because I don't think many people expected that. I don't remember. I was a little too young to be into all the internet leaks and stuff when this movie originally came out, but I do know for a fact that I didn't expect Superman to die at the end of the film. I don't think most people that I talked to expected Superman to die at the end of the film. Dramatically, it worked really, really good because Superman dies doing the right thing regardless of if people cared or trusted him or not. And if you look in the movie, too, he's being tempted kind of the whole time to just quit, to hang it up, to just, go into complete isolation, just quit this whole Superman thing since people don't like him. They're not grateful for it. And so seeing him in the end ultimately make the right choice. And then after he dies, people are kind of like, oh crap, he was helpful. We really did need him. And with Superman playing the Jesus or the God metaphor, whatever you want to call it, it's also really interesting too, because you see so many people now at that point realize, oh crap, in a sense, we killed God. And now that God is hypothetically dead, now what do we do? And we end up with people who are hopeless. And I think that is also really, really interesting and a really, really good thought and moral dilemma, because let's look at it like this. The New York Times at one point posted big and bright, God is dead, okay? I, of course, as a Christian, completely disagree with that take. However, if you sit and think about it, if you take humanity, okay, and you remove God from the picture, okay, what do us as humanity have? We don't have any purpose. We don't have any hope. We don't have anything to strive toward. I mean, we can make up goals in our minds and things like that, this and there. Hey, my goal is to get $1 million, buy a fancy mansion, Lamborghinis, all that stuff. But ultimately, like, what is it for? It's not really for anything. There's no ultimate stuff there. And so I think using Superman as the God or Jesus metaphor in this film works really well, because once you remove him from the picture and you look, and humanity seems really hopeless at that point, and then you have characters like Batman realizing, oh crap, I really, really screwed up. My judgment was really, really off with this. And so we see him at the end of the movie think, okay, I'm going to do whatever I can in my power to make things right after I helped make things a lot worse. And ultimately, that leads us to a really, really great point where we see that character development with Batman, which is very, very important, and it's going to lead things very, very well into Justice League. I'm, of course, referring to Zack Snyder's Justice League. We don't talk about Justice League one day, but that day is not today, thank goodness. Now, bad things I have of this movie in my notes. First thing, they just brutally, just completely execute Jimmy Olsen. I don't know why they did that. That was dumb. Zack, come on, man. I mean, I'm not the first person to point out how much that people hate this. Jimmy Olsen, we love Jimmy Olsen. Why you got to do that to us? Why you got to do that? It just seems kind of dumb. I mean, it didn't need to happen. His character could have been anybody. A Batman killing, yeah, we talked about that a little bit. I kind of got on a bit of a tangent with the good side. Definitely not something that I'm particularly a fan of, but I think it works in this film. But definitely, being, if you're someone who's a really hardcore Batman fan from the comics and stuff, that's going to be a big no-no for you. And so I get that. I empathize with that. That's why I lob it in the bad section. So unfortunately, I will be holding that against the film. And there's something in this film that I was thought of too. And the same kind of idea in Man of Steel. But I mentioned, the South Park creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, teaching that class about or but, whenever you're linking scenes together and things, how people react, that good idea. This movie's kind of got the same problem. There's scenes, and the scenes definitely are pointing to something, but they're not, it's kind of scattered. The movie can be hard to follow, I think, sometimes if you're not, paying a lot of attention. Obviously, that's not great. You gotta have to pay a lot of attention. And if I watch this, the Ultimate Edition, it's a 3-hour movie, so that's a little rocky if you're trying to pay close attention for the whole 3 hours. It can lose you here and there. You can get distracted. I mean, so not the greatest filmmaking technique there, unfortunately. I've said a lot of great things, but I can say a lot of bad things as well. The possible worst thing about this movie is Martha. The way that Superman fight ends, I get the picture, and I mentioned that in the good section about how through that interaction that he sees the humanity of Superman. But they got to do the whole mom name thing tie-in, and I'm like, this is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard. It's bad. Again, there's a million other reviewers out there that'll tell you the same thing, how bad this is. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but it's bad. It's just it's terrible. It could have been anything. It could have been Lois that he was saying, save Lois or something like that. And then I think it would be different if they showed us in a way, yeah, he's got humanity. I think that's a better idea than saying, hey, your mom's got the same name as my mom. How about that? Because that just makes it cheesy and dumb. And you're like, you just ended this whole fight scene in the dumbest way possible. So, yeah, I don't. It's bad. Something else that I would consider bad, mainly because this scene does not go anywhere in this film. But we see the scene where Wonder Woman is looking on the the LexCorp drive or whatever, and she sees all the other metahumans, which is just building up to Justice League. But that scene does nothing for the film. And then for some reason, out of nowhere, and this is also not explained in the film, Wonder Woman decides to come out of hiding and help fight Doomsday. And I feel like there's probably some relation to the two scenes, but they don't really make it a strong enough connection. She would have said a comment being like, I know there's more of us somewhere, and that makes me want to fight more. I feel like it's implied, but it's not implied well enough. I do have a note, I gotta say. This is something that I don't think is neither good nor bad. I have a lot to talk about. But Lex Luthor, okay, with Jesse Eisenberg. A lot of people critique it. I also think kind of weird. I don't really like what he does with the character. However, I complain about that all day long. I will say the role he plays in this film is genuinely good, though, okay? Meaning that even though his Lex Luthor is not, like your Gene Hackman or your, your Justice League Lex Luthor cartoon, because that Lex Luthor was fantastic, really, really good. He's not that Lex Luthor, but he still ultimately does and makes decisions that I think that Lex Luthor would do in this universe. Or maybe I'll put it like this. I think the character's written well, but maybe not acted well. We'll put it like that. Written well and not very acted well. So a little mixed on that. I can't really say that's good or bad because that character's kind of got two halves. One that's I like and one that I don't. So I don't know what to do with that. And then something else I got to say too. I never remembered this because, again, this is the first time watching the Ultimate Edition, but there's the guy in the wheelchair, and the wheelchair bomb goes off in the courthouse, right? And it never occurred to me that the wheelchair was lined with lead, and that's why Superman could not, see that it was an explosive. And I don't know if it was Ultimate Edition pointing that out, or if they pointed that out in the normal standard version. I just never really picked up on it because it makes total sense. But I'm thinking to myself, if that wasn't in the standard version, why wasn't it? Because I think that's pretty important to mention. So moving things along into my conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Batman versus Superman. I'm going to be totally honest with you. It is, I think, an underrated gem. I absolutely love this movie. Not quite to the same extent as, my favorite superhero movies, but it's definitely up there. And I really had a great time going back because I haven't rewatched this movie in a long time. I really liked going back and revisiting it because it reminded me of all these great ideas and concepts that Zack Snyder had that he is going to continue to use in his version of Justice League. So it makes me actually really excited to go into more DCEU stuff eventually. So I'm thinking about putting that on the horizon as to what reviews I'm going to put out next. But either way, I really like the movie. I know a lot of people don't. And I'm going to controversially give this movie an 8 out of 10, ladies and gentlemen. And so if you disagree, and I know you probably do, or if you do agree, hey, I want to hear your comments because I want to know what you guys think. I know the Zack Snyder stuff, super controversial. A lot of people torn. I, for one, like this movie. I have some critiques about some Zack Snyder stuff, but I have a lot of great things that I love to say about it as well. So Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, 8 out of 10. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys all for watching. I've been K Swope, and hey, we're going to have more Superman reviews coming up, building up to the release of Superman in 2025. Hopefully you guys are excited for that. We'll have more Superman reviews next week as well. Make sure you guys are ready. But in the meantime, I'm K Swope, and I will see you in the next one.